So using these principles of smart power, we are working with our military to support security gains and foster long-term stability. We are using diplomacy to solve problems and diffuse crisis situations. And we are emphasizing development as a means to prevent conflict from taking root over the long term. And we recognize that in order to deploy these tools of smart power at this time, we have to reflect and respond to the dramatic global changes that are sweeping the world and that have changed the way we have to do business. So we've taken a hard look at the structure of the State Department and USAID. We've taken a look at our approach and our basic capabilities. Now, some of you may have heard of the Quadrennial Defense Review. That's the Department of Defense's effort every 4 years to align its resources and organization with its strategies and demands. I saw firsthand how effective the QDR was when I served on the Senate Armed Services Committee. So I stole that idea for the State Department, and in December 2010, we released the first ever Quadrennial Diplomacy and Development Review, the QDDR. And since then, we have worked to break down the silos that too often build up between offices and agencies to equip ourselves to deal with the long-term global trends. For example, when I arrived at the State Department, I realized that energy security was certainly one of the defining challenges of our time. So I created a new bureau in the State Department filled with experts and diplomats who lead our government's work to ensure a stable, affordable supply of energy as we transition over time to a clean energy economy. We also improved our focus on the essential elements of building democratic, secure, and just societies. And our counterterrorism and law enforcement programs are now housed side by side with those that defend human rights and promote opportunities for young people. Our new Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations is working to improve our ability to prevent violent conflict and respond when crises break out. And we're strengthening our leadership in our Civilian Response Corps to make it more flexible and expeditionary. Today's civilian experts are as likely to wear work boots and cargo pants as business suits and loafers. They function in some of the most remote and least governed places on the planet. They work as a unified force, development experts, agricultural specialists, democracy and human rights advocates to advance America's core interests. Let me briefly explain how we are putting this vision of smart power into action. First, we are bringing all the tools of American power to bear in conflict and post-conflict situations, where the links among defense, diplomacy, and development are the most obvious. Think Afghanistan, Iraq, fighting the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda and elsewhere in Africa, protecting civilians while helping support the creation of a new Libya. Security improvements only last when they are backed by effective, accountable governments that can deliver results for their people. And building up those governments and their institutions requires a strong and active civilian presence. In Afghanistan, for example, we are pursuing a three-part approach that we call Fight, Talk, Build. And this is 3D security in action. Our military is maintaining pressure on the Taliban to come to the negotiating table and enhancing the security capabilities of the Afghan forces. At the same time, we are opening the door for Afghans to engage in an inclusive peace process that could separate the Taliban from al-Qaeda and end decades of conflict in Afghanistan. And finally, we are working to lay an economic foundation for long-term sustainable development. In Iraq, we have completed the largest transition from military to civilian leadership since the Marshall Plan. Civilians are leading our lasting partnership with a free and democratic Iraq. Now, we are very clear-eyed about the challenges that remain and the work that lies ahead. But Iraq has taken charge of its own security and has the chance, if its leaders take it, to stand as an important example of an emerging democracy in a region experiencing historic transformation. This time last year, we stepped up with military and civilian support in Libya's hour of need. But the true measure of Libya's success will not be in toppling a dictator, but in building a democracy based on the rule of law and respect for human rights. And our troops and civilians are working together in other places as well. Long before the Coney 2012 campaign made the Lord's Resistance Army a popular topic of discussion, we had soldiers and civilians on the ground working to help communities address this threat. When a devastating earthquake and tsunami hit Japan last year, our military forces, diplomats, and development experts pulled together to deliver a massive and immediate response. And in the Horn of Africa, the United States has provided almost $1 billion in humanitarian assistance that has saved countless lives from malnutrition, starvation, and disease. And our sustained commitment has demonstrated the best of America, helping to undermine the extremist narrative of terrorist groups like al-Shabaab in Somalia. So our military and civilian forces, working alongside one another in many places, experience immediate conflict and crisis. But we also work together to try to reduce the number of places where we need to have that kind of response. Because sending American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines into harm's way is not a decision that any president makes lightly. So at the State Department, our diplomats work around the clock to do everything we can to exhaust all other options. So a second key element of our Smart Power agenda is using diplomacy to prevent conflicts and resolve disputes before they become crises that could demand military intervention. Working hand in hand with our diplomacy efforts, the third D of Smart Power is development, investing in the long-term foundations of human security and stability. Now, of course, our development work is rooted in our values. We think it's wrong that people die of preventable diseases and conditions that have no place in the 21st century. But development is also an essential and equal pillar of our national security strategy. We want to help countries become more self-sufficient so they can be stronger partners to help us take on shared challenges. Broad-based economic growth fosters human dignity and helps build more stable societies. And not only research, but human experience suggests that as many as 40% of countries recovering from conflict revert to violence within a decade. But when they grow their economies and raise people's incomes, the risk of violence drops substantially. And there is no better way of doing that than introducing free market principles, encouraging entrepreneurship, creating conditions for men and women to see the results of their own labor in rising incomes and better opportunities for their children.